So you are not just a general economic attaché, you are actually an attaché representing the country of Sri Lanka. And the country of Sri Lanka is a country that is trying to diversify. In the late 1970s and the early 1980s, your country did some major diversification into garments. You're a great producer of garments. We just don't see much happening since that time. And the challenge now is to work out which sectors do you want to move into, how do you reach people in those sectors, how do you make sure you can respond to those people in those sectors so that you actually bring them to your shores. Hopefully through the examples from Costa Rica and from Singapore, you've got some sense of what your role as the economic attaché is in that process. But right now what we want to do is introduce you to some of the improved materials and the improved connections that are going to happen when you go backwards into the government. It's going to be a fairly short presentation of a lot of material that you will be engaging with more directly, and a lot of people you're going to be engaging with more directly in your government. Over the last 4 or 5 months, a group has been developing a new targeting mechanism in your government to work out what sectors are the key sectors that you should be focusing on. Now, they haven't only been developing the targets, they've also been looking at countries that have been trying to get into these sectors that should be targeted, and they've been trying to understand which countries are the most important sources of investment. They're trying to understand which countries are the biggest competitors, what kinds of incentives do they offer. Now, they're producing a lot of material that they're going to be sharing with you about those kinds of things. And they're going to also be producing material that is tailored to your country to say, this is the reason why we want you to go after this sector in your country, because it's a form of investment, for instance. That's the targeting group. The second thing that we find is a group that's been working on investor readiness. What they've been doing is speaking to firms that are in Sri Lanka, but also firms that are not in Sri Lanka. And they've been asking them, what are the things that you are having the hardest time with? And then they've been going and they've been solving those problems of business. So they're learning, how do you speak to business, and then how do you go backwards to ministries and actually solve their problems? Because many of the problems that have to be solved are not in their authority, they're in the authority zone of different ministries all over. The third group has been working on trade and exports. And they've been speaking to firms that are exporters from the country, and they've been asking what makes it difficult to export, because whoever you speak to in your country is going to want to export out of Sri Lanka. And they have been doing similarly, finding out what the problems are and then mobilizing solutions to this. For instance, they found out from a lot of small export sectors that the problem of certification is a big issue in Sri Lanka. That if you aren't into a specific sector, you don't know how to certify people working in that sector. You don't know how to certify the production in that sector. So then they've been actually solving that problem so that they can actually get certification solutions. The next group is one that is an investor promotions group. And this group has been identifying identifying the major things that would draw investors to Sri Lanka, and putting together pitch books for the kinds of sectors that the targeting group has identified. So they've identified pitch books for things like airport hotels, pitch books for things like sectors like solar panels. And they've been in those pitch books identifying why Sri Lanka is a good place. They've been identifying what the requirements would be to move into the sector, and they've also been identifying the kinds of firms that are important and where those firms are. Now, these guys are all going to be providing that information to you. They're going to be providing lists of firms that you can go and speak to. They're going to be providing the material that you can take to those firms. More importantly, they're going to be waiting for you to tell them what happens when you meet with the firms in your country. When you give them the pitch book and the person says to you, this is a really good pitch book, but they don't have this piece of information, you need to be giving it back to them. When you go to a firm and you see the kind of capacities that you don't see in Sri Lanka, you need to be telling them so that they can learn. They are going to be your backward linkages so that you can then link backwards into the government more generally. But you are going to be their forward linkages so that they can understand the targets that you're after. This is a new model for Sri Lanka, a more aggressive model, a more connected model that doesn't leave you on your own, but puts you in part of an ecosystem trying to facilitate economic diversification in your country.